My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And then the microscope explodes, and everybody's happy because it's a win for DC. And, you know, pretty entertaining too.
That just tells me you have not gone to see The Batman yet. But, we're not talking about that this week. I have seen the movie. All I will say about it now is that I felt like I was reading an issue of Detective Comics when I was watching that movie.
What I will say about it, I have not seen it, but I actually have gone from my lukewarmness last time we talked about it to actually wanting to see it. A number of people, especially DC fans, have said good things, and actually everybody that I've heard talk about it has said good things about it. So,
So, yeah, if you have not seen The Batman yet, I highly encourage you go see it. It is 3 hours long, and it is fairly grimdark, kind of like it feels like a film noir. Like some people have called it a neo noir. So the guy I saw it with, our friend One Shot, said that for him, he was able to enjoy it, but he didn't enjoy the tone as much. He's like, that's not his kind of movie. So if you're not one to enjoy darker movies, like if you don't like the TV show Criminal Minds, then you probably will have a hard time watching The Batman.
Okay. I don't know. When you said grimdark, I always get Warhammer in my head when somebody says grimdark, because I'm pretty sure that's the origin of the. So it's not on that level, but it's just, I think neo-noir hopefully is more accurate, because if it's true grimdark, that's fun, but 3 hours of it might be a lot.
I don't truthfully know what grimdark means. I just sort of used it. You caught me in a lie. What does grimdark actually mean?
Well, I mean, it comes from the tagline of Warhammer 40K: in the grim dark future of the 41st century, there is only war. And basically, in grimdark, in like proper, true, like grimdark story, everything is terrible. Like there are no villains, and well, I mean, there are no heroes, definitely. And it's a universe where everybody is technically kind of in the wrong and kind of terrible, and things are bad, and there is no hope. There's just action, basically. Like, yeah, it's pretty. It makes for a good game, and it makes for like good action, but not really good storytelling.
All right, so I revoke what I said earlier. The Batman is not grimdark. We'll settle on neo-noir. Yeah. Anyway, I just want to plug your local library, folks, because a few years ago, before the pandemic, I had gotten into the habit of going to my public library because I discovered they have trade paperbacks of comic books that you can read for free. You don't have to buy them. And for me, if I were to go out and buy a trade paperback of, like, I don't know, let's say Batgirl, a trade paperback usually covers 6 to 8 issues. They usually cost like $20-25. And I can read one of those things in one sitting, like in a few hours. So if I were to actually spend all that money for something that takes less than an hour to read, that's a pretty high dollar per hour rate of entertainment. But I can go to the library and get like 4 of those for free, and I just have to make sure I bring them back by the deadline. But then when the pandemic started it made it very hard to, I shouldn't say, my public library made it hard to return books when it was convenient for, I guess, me as a person who worked during the day. But things are opening up again, and I got an email saying I had to renew my library card, and I had to come to a branch in person to do this. And I was kind of annoyed by that. I'm like, oh, really? And literally, I went in. All I did was I handed them my card. They scanned it. They updated my address in the computer, and then that was it. That's all they needed me to do. But the very act of actually getting me to go to the library meant that I checked out some books while I was there. So good on you, library, for getting books again.
Maybe that's why they did it, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised. And I know this is a little bit of a side thing, but if you're into mangas, that's an other thing because, I have, at some point in my life, read the entirety of Full Metal Alchemist in over one weekend. And if I were to purchase the entirety of Full Metal Alchemist in solid physical media, I don't know, it'd probably be running me a few $100s. So, and actually, the first manga I ever read was through the public library as well. It was Rurouni Kenshin, and it was great. I still love it. But yeah, that also would have cost quite a pretty penny to get the entirety of it.
And there was manga mixed in with the American graphic novels in the graphic novel section I was looking at yesterday. But none of the manga that were there really caught my eye, and that's okay. Anyway, moral of the story, kids, if you want to get into comics and or manga and you don't want to spend money, go to the library. Maybe read some of the other books too, but I for one, am more of a comic book reader than a novelization reader.
Sorry, while we're plugging the public library, they have some of the Dungeons and Dragons core books and adventures there too, and those are actually pretty expensive. So do that.
They also had PS4 games, which I know is like at a date now because there's the PS5, but still, to be able to rent a video game for free, video stores are gone now. Video game
rental kind of died when movie rentals did, eh?
Yeah. Anyway, go to your library, kids.
Wow, we could not sound more like old men if we were trying right now.
So today it's all about Peacemaker, the streaming series, which has just finished its first season on HBO Max in the United States. And then in Canada, it aired on Crave, the Bell Media streaming service that has signed an exclusive deal that all HBO Max originals and HBO Max exclusives go to Crave for people in Canada. This is the case unless the series has a pre-existing streaming agreement somewhere else. For example, Titans is a series that started in the US on the DC Universe streaming service, and when it was airing on that service, it got a contract with Netflix Canada. So when we watch it in Canada, it's labeled as a Netflix original. But it moved in the state, like the DC Universe streaming service died, and then all of the original shows for that service got moved to HBO Max. So now Titans is considered an HBO Max original, and the third season aired on HBO Max instead of DC Universe. However, because the show had its pre-existing agreement for Netflix Canada, the third season and the first two seasons all air on Netflix in Canada. So even though Titans is a HBO Max original, it doesn't go to Crave in Canada because it already had a pre-existing deal with Netflix. Does that make sense?
I mean, more or less. It's one of those things like, I remember when when the last seasons of Arrested Development hit Netflix and they were calling it a semi-original, but then they've got things like, what was the movie? I just watched it with Mjolnir, Mitchell's versus the Machine, which is a Netflix original, but it's also a Sony Pictures, like Sony Animation Pictures movie, so it wasn't fully done just by Netflix, so I guess they just distributed it? I was confused as to how, like, something, like, because it wasn't like, something like Klaus that was produced by a much more obscure or newer animation studio, and then Netflix got its release. But it just, yeah, it brings a little bit to confusion, and also makes us realize that the streaming wars are still ongoing.
Anyway, let's get into the Secret Origins segment. So, Beeper, how were you introduced to the Peacemaker character?
I think we covered my Secret Origin segments when we did the Suicide Squad, actually, because I had never heard of Peacemaker before that. So yeah, it's a very simple one. I watched the Suicide Squad, or I can't even remember if we did an episode. When I watched the Suicide Squad, I saw John Cena wearing a weird helmet and colorful stretchy uniform, and that was my introduction to Peacemaker.
So you were not part of the episode we did on the Suicide Squad, but we did talk about it when we talked about comic book films from 2020 and 2021.
Oh, that's right.
But my Secret Origin's the same. I honestly had never heard of the Peacemaker character until they announced... Actually, you know what? They announced the cast for the movie before they announced who they were playing. So I knew John Cena was going to be in the movie, but it wasn't until, I think it was right before the first DC Fandom, that they announced like who they were all playing. And like most of the cast of that movie, I was like, who is this? Like some of the characters, like Polka Dot Man, I'd heard of because of my, extensive knowledge of Batman lore.
But that's Peacemaker. Polka Dot Man was a Batman the Animated Series original, right?
No, you're thinking of Condiment King.
You're right, I am.
Polka Dot Man's like from the Silver Age, like from the 50s and 60s.
So I just have a question because I'm interested. Who did you think John Cena was going to play when he was announced?
Honestly, the list of the actors was so big, I didn't even... I'm not very good at like speculating on that kind of thing. I had no idea who John Cena was going to play. Did you have a sense?
Not really, but like... I don't... But I do remember at some point thinking he would have been really good. What's the name of the Batman villain? Maximilian something? The one who thinks he's Zeus.
Oh, Maxie Zeus.
Yeah, I think John Cena could pull off that role really well.
Yeah, he would make good as Maxie Zeus. I'd agree with that.
But I feel like that character is being used in the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy show, so it was less likely of him showing up in something else.
Well, to both our surprise, Peacemaker is indeed a comic book character. He was originally owned by a company called Charleston Comics. So he made his first appearance in the series called Fightin' 5, and kind of like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Fightin' 5 ends with an apostrophe and no G. So I guess it's supposed to be like Fighting 5, but it's Fightin' 5. First of all, if you're going to have a comic book series, having a number in your title is confusing because issues are released with numbers. So to me to say Fightin' 5 40, I have to make it very clear. Fightin' 5 issue 40. At the very least, if you're going to have Fightin' 5 as your title, spell out the word 5. Don't put the number there. That's just going to make things more confusing.
I mean, especially if you're doing a thing where, like, I don't know, it just feels like, the Sinister Sixth, the Fightin' 5. Like, when you're trying to make an alliteration, it makes more sense when you actually do write it out.
Obviously, this is why this series failed, because it was canceled one issue after Peacemaker's first appearance. Peacemaker debuted. It
wasn't enough to save it.
Yeah, he was in Fightin' 5 number 40 in November 1966. And that issue was written by Joe Gill and drawn by Pat Boyette. So they're considered the creators of the Peacemaker character. But yes, that series was doomed to fail. It was canceled with issue 41. I guess he was popular enough that he then got his own Peacemaker series, but that only lasted for 5 issues.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
And Charleston
Yeah. Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, by comic standards, it's not the worst. Like, so many comic characters last 1-2 issues and then it just disappears.
Yeah, and Charleston Comics, on the whole, did not succeed. they ended up being folded into DC Comics, actually. Like, DC Comics acquired them in the 80s. So they got this huge, or not huge, they got a catalog of characters that would have been previously property of Charleston Comics. And then they slowly found ways to introduce all the different characters into the DC universe. I think what Peacemaker might be most famous for is his connection to Watchmen, because some people might know this, that Alan Moore's original idea for Watchmen was to tell the same story, but with like characters from Charleston Comics. So pretty much every character in Watchmen is basically like a stand-in for a character from Charleston Comics. But DC didn't want to, I guess, have those characters go that route. So they came up with
Peacemaker would be the comedian?
That's correct. So Peacemaker was basically like the starting template for the comedian. The Ted Cord Blue Beetle was the starting point for Night Owl, and the question was the starting point for Rorschach.
I don't really see the Blue Beetle as much, but maybe that's... No, never mind. I'm thinking of the Tick. The Blue Beetle makes sense.
So hearing that, can you see that connection between Peacemaker and the comedian?
I mean, kind of. I mean, once you said that there was a connection between him and a character in the Watchmen, it couldn't be anybody other than the comedian. But I do, I think, they're definitely, I can see it. I don't think I would have come to that conclusion on my own per se, though, because I think it is gone differently enough. But then again, I say that, but it's gone differently enough from the version of the character I know, but maybe the original version of Peacemaker was a lot closer to the comedian.
No, it's at its core, the Peacemaker from the comics is pretty similar to the version we got in the movie The Suicide Squad.
Yeah,
you can see how...
I think like I can see how it is, but I think it's a little bit different in the sense that, like, I don't know, maybe it's how the comedian was when he started, but not where his character arc ended, because the comedian is definitely, very disillusioned and very kind of pessimistic in some ways about things that are happening.
Right. So I can totally see how, again, Peacemaker was the kind of starting point for the comedian as a character, and they said, okay, where does this go from here? And I can also see, I think DC was right to kind of encourage him to not use those characters, because hypothetically, if you had been a fan of Peacemaker, to see his character kind of go down the track that the comedian goes down, that would have been a really hard thing to see. And
not to mention the fact that he dies like almost immediately. Like, he's back in flashbacks, but one of the first thing that happens in the Watchmen is the comedian dying.
Yeah, and I really think I don't think fans of Blue Beetle would have been fond if he had the same role as Night Owl in Watchmen,
especially in the movie.
Yes. So anyway, that's kind of Peacemaker's claim to fame in the comics, is that he was the kind of source material for the comedian as part of Watchmen. So if you've read those comics, you've seen that movie, you might enjoy that connection. He first made an appearance in DC Comics proper in 1988 with a 4-issue miniseries. And it seems like he's made a handful of appearances over the years. There's been a couple different characters using the Peacemaker name. But once again, it's just like the Eternals and Shang-Chi. We are at the point where obscure characters that have never really had a lot of staying power in the comic book world are being adapted into these multi-million-dollar projects, which kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, it's this weird thing too. Like, you'd almost think it'd be easier to come up with a new original content rather than just scrape the barrel of the archives you have. But I guess that's probably more expensive because you have to like pay people to come up with it instead of having having an existing intellectual property and adapting it. Maybe I don't know because especially considering some of them end up like not this wouldn't be the case as much, but sometimes they just end up really far from what they originally were, like or far enough that it's almost new characters. Because I mean, like the Guardians of the Galaxy were pretty far in a lot of ways from what their comic counterparts were. And so, like, it almost would have made more sense to just make that movie without tacking on characters that already exist. But I guess, as the Joker and I guess the Suicide Squad also have shown, if you want to make a movie, tagging on IPs might just, create buzz, and that makes money.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about James Gunn's affinity for obscure characters a little later, but that's the whole secret origin. He's a character from Charleston Comics, served as the inspiration for the comedian, and then has made a splattering of appearances in DC Comics. Talking about his role in The Suicide Squad. So yeah, they listed this big ensemble cast, and they listed off all these characters. And he stands out because he's a big muscly man, and he has a pretty, I guess it's a costume that stands out, and you're like, what is he wearing? But then you see pictures of what Peacemaker in the comic books looks like, and you're like, wow, that is a very comics accurate costume. And I appreciate that. And that, I think before I'd seen any of the footage, I just was drawn to the fact that his costume was so comics accurate. I liked that, even though I had zero affinity for the character before then.
I mean, and like, I think it goes better with him as a character to have a comics accurate, like, he doesn't, like, even though he's, like, in what is more or less a stealth mission, he still wears bright colors, but at the same time, he's the kind of person that really doesn't care. Like, he knows what he's about, he's there to do it, and it doesn't matter to him. And, you know, and apparently it doesn't matter whether he dies or not, but that's a different thing.
This Peacemaker series was actually announced before the movie had even come out. And so coming into the movie, I was like, wow, they must really believe in this character. They've already greenlit a spinoff. But after learning the secret origin of the streaming series, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, Beeper, but basically, the Suicide Squad was supposed to come out August 2020. That was when its release was supposed to happen. So they filmed it mostly like pre-pandemic, and then they kind of like go from filming the movie, and then all of a sudden the initial shutdown where the whole world was stuck at home for 3 months happened. James Gunn, basically how he chose to spend his time at home is that he wrote this Peacemaker series. He wrote all 8 episodes at once, not knowing if it was going to ever be turned into anything. He just sort of needed a creative outlet. And I guess there was something about John Cena's performance from them filming the Suicide Squad that he's like, I think I could do something with this. I think I could do something with this actor and this character. So he wrote this 8-episode miniseries, not knowing if it would ever go anywhere. And he basically pitched it to HBO Max, and they approved it. They said, yeah, we'll make this. It just sort of goes to show how desperate HBO Max is for good content. As a newer streaming service.
I thought you were going to say something about the staying power, or the future star power of John Cena. Because, I mean, like, I think we talked about how he plays, like, Peacemaker is close to the John Cena persona of John Cena as a wrestler. I think I mentioned that, but also I feel like he's like, not to rag on The Rock, but I think he's a better actor than Dwayne Johnson. Like, he hasn't done as many things, but he's been able to do more subtle things and more things that aren't just comedy. Like, he's got great comedic timing, but I think he has a bit more depth in like what he can do than The Rock, and I think it's about time he starts, well, it's about time. It's always a weird thing when, like, he's not, John Batista, but like it's
Dave Batista.
David Batista, sorry, yeah. But he's a nice in between where it's like, yeah, I think he deserves a bit more than what he's been able to do so far. No, but David Batista probably could have just been an actor.
So this is where this gets even riskier for Warner Brothers, I think, because not only did they greenlight this idea, they said, yep, we're going to make this show. They committed to having the whole thing filmed before the Suicide Squad even came out, because they filmed this thing in like January 2021. As we know, the Suicide Squad didn't end up getting released in theaters till August 2021. So they filmed this whole 8-episode series before the movie had even come out that was going to introduce the character. Yeah. And to me, I'm like, what if this like no one liked this character? You would have that would have been a huge waste of money to have made this show.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there was a part of it that was just trust in what James Gunn is capable of doing, and I think he's starting to prove himself quite a bit. But also, like, I know Idris Elba was the biggest name in that movie, but like the second biggest recognizable name and kind of star of it was definitely John Cena. Like, and it was much more likely that he would do, a miniseries than Idris Elba, I think, at this point. So, like, it would have been something different if they would have been, like, trying to get the Rat Man, the second, or daughter of the Rat Man, whatever. That would have been a lot more, tricky, or even, like, doing a although I would watch this 100%. I would watch a spinoff with Peter Capaldi, just Brainiac. Brainiac? Was it Brainiac?
He was the thinker.
No, he was the thinker, right. Brainiac would have been. But yeah, I would have watched that personally, but I really like Peter Capaldi. And I think his performance was great, but like that's a different thing. I think John Cena was still, it helps when you can bring in previous footage, right? Because I remember, the story, once again, it's about a wrestler, but like when The Rock did like the opening for The Mummy as the Scorpion King, it's because executives in the studio saw him in like the dailies of like that one scene he filmed that's a flashback that they decide to greenlight the Scorpion King movie. So I feel like this is less of a risk than that was. And, to be fair, that flopped, but I don't think this one is flopping.
So there you go. That's the Secret Origin segment for the streaming series. James Gunn used the COVID shutdown as a burst of creativity, and HBO Max, Warner Brothers, DC, they all kind of went ahead with them, filmed this whole season before the movie even came out. The movie didn't do super well financially, but it did certainly draw critical attention. I would say like critics and audiences seem to still enjoy the film. I think people were kind of questions like, oh, why is the walking symbol of values that aren't necessarily ones we want to promote getting his own show as opposed to some of the other characters? Thankfully, I guess James Gunn was thinking of these things because the series certainly addresses that. But any further ado, give us the Blu-ray case description for Peacemaker.
This task force doesn't officially exist, so I don't do anything stupid.
No problem.
Seriously, dude?
We're saving the world. It's everything we've ever wanted.
2 clowns in costumes and a couple of rejects.
It's a little judgmental. Every time we turn around, one of you's doing something
stupid.
It's like a real team out there.
I think maybe you should, because again, I only saw the first 2 episodes.
After the events of the Suicide Squad, and a post-credit scene which reveal that Peacemaker in fact survived getting shot in the throat, I think it was. He is pulled into a new secret mission that conveniently requires him to stay in one town and not involve any other players of the DC universe, because it's such a secret mission that he can't even be told about what he's working on. So check out this series where Peacemaker's part of a very small, like 5-person Black Ops team trying to stop something that obviously as you watch more episodes becomes clear, but initially he's just sort of told to follow orders and shoot. And as the series goes on, he starts to question, do I want to just shoot and kill people anymore?
Yeah, you talk a lot about conveniences and why that. But do you think it works?
I think it does, and I think that's to the credit of James Gunn as a writer here. The confined setting and the fact that other characters aren't involved, the way it's presented, it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, although I feel like there isn't a precedent for it. But like, I feel like the one thing that has been built up enough in the DC EU is Amanda Waller's character, and she could definitely pull something like that off, even though her appearance in the Suicide Squad ends a little bit poorly.
So I don't know. Do you have to have? I think they kind of give you enough at the beginning to, like, you don't have to necessarily see the Suicide Squad in order to watch the show.
No, I think it's like it's one of those things where like it might help, but you don't have to, or like it definitely helps in some regards, but it also like even just some of the dialogue and the jokes around him, like in the first episode, around him going back to see his dad, and like just the discussion they have on the way out is enough to just establish who he is and why, you know, he does the things that he does a little bit. Not like giving a full character description, but like enough for you to understand what's going on.
A question I had preparing for this episode of the podcast, is this basically just more of what we saw in the Suicide Squad, or are there things that make it different for good or bad?
I mean, I think I'm assuming you're going for like the idea that tonally and the kind of type of humor were very similar between the two.
What I'm trying to figure out, would somebody who enjoyed the Suicide Squad also enjoy Peacemaker?
I think so. I think that like, and I mean, unless they found Peacemaker as a character very annoying, and in which case they might just give up on it early. But I think that I think there's enough there that, yeah, if somebody liked it and enjoyed what was happening, they definitely, I think they would enjoy this. Although I feel like the movie The Suicide Squad had a bit more of the kind of, I feel like it had more character building, but possibly just because it had more specific characters they were trying to create for it. And, you know, it was a movie, so it was meant to, like, have the characters feel like a found family by the end of it, which means you accelerate that kind of thing. Whereas, like, in a TV show, it takes more time. But I think it's still, it feels like it was still working towards that a little bit, but, you know, slower.
You make a point there. Oh, people who didn't like Peacemaker in the movie wouldn't want to watch this show. And to those people, if you're listening to this, if you're like, I saw that movie, I found Peacemaker obnoxious, I just didn't like him, you would probably enjoy this show, because most of the cast, most of the characters in this spend a lot of time just pointing out how terrible Peacemaker is.
That is true. I hadn't thought of that. So maybe you would cathartically enjoy it. But you still like it. I think it depends. If you were like, that character is a terrible person, then yes. But if you didn't like the performance and the way he was, like, he still is very much the same character, and he's on screen a lot, so that might put people off. But you're right, he does get insulted like every 2 seconds.
And since you haven't seen all the episodes, I will say he does experience a lot of character growth by the end. He's not the same person he was when the season starts.
Which, is good. Because I think, as in, The Watchmen, if the comedian had just stayed the way he was at the very beginning and not changed, it wouldn't be very compelling. And I also I think the fact that he did not change in the movie was necessary, because, I mean, to be fair, he was kind of acting as a foil to both Rick Flag and the rest of the team almost. Like, he was still a very different character, and his purpose was to not change, especially in the finale. But it is nice to know that there is some evolution there, and as you pointed out, and like you said, everybody in the show points out, kind of well needed changes.
I just want to mention the opening sequence. I guess James Gunn, his goal was to create an opening sequence that you wouldn't skip.
I mean, I don't know.
Mission accomplished, as far as I look forward to it every time.
All right, well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I don't know. It is, you're right that, relative to a lot of other opening sequences, it's less skippable. But I don't know if it's unskippable either.
Well, it's so funny because all these characters in costume are doing this coordinated dance routine, and they got the most serious looks on their faces, even though what they're doing is so silly. And it's just, to me, it's so funny. You got old people, young people, it's such a weird group of people. And frankly, even that song, I thought it was some song from the 80s that I'd never heard of before, like most of James Gunn's music choices. But it turns out that band Wigwam is a band that exists now, and their whole thing is their music is meant to pay tribute to music from the 80s.
Okay. So it's not that far from James Gunn's usual, but instead of giving money to old retired people, it's giving money to people who are still in business. That's nice.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and do not take my saying that I might skip over the opening sequence for me saying that I don't like it. It's great. I don't know if hilarious is the right word, because I don't think it's super funny. Like I can't control myself, but it is entertaining. It's entertainingly funny.
Now, this series, I should say, has already been renewed for season 2. HBO Max doesn't really release their numbers, so all the charts that people look at to analyze how many, who's watching what on what streaming service, HBO Max isn't included in those. So we're just sort of going off of whatever information they self-publish. So it's really hard to say how successful Peacemaker has been. One person I watched on YouTube pointed out that it didn't really trend on social media except during its premiere and its finale, which, if you compare it to other streaming shows that are popular, they're usually trending whenever a new episode comes out. So
yeah, that's true. But again, I think this is still better than most other things HBO Max has done. You know what I mean? It is a step up for them, as well as DC, but it's not obviously they don't yet have the same kind of iconic level that Disney was able to have almost instantly with the Marvel series, but and that Netflix has been cultivating for quite a while.
And you know what? Having an 8-episode season makes for a pretty decent budget per episode. None of the visual effects looked fake to me. There's an eagle that's a character in this, and it's completely CGI. And for the most part, I thought it was very convincing.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the good things about having series that are shorter, is you can focus on what you actually want to do. I think the British television figured that out a long time ago, but we're only starting to get there. And I think maybe that is one of the good things about streaming, is it does allow that kind of flexibility and allows you to do the things that you want to do.
Now, how did you care for the mystery element in the first? Because they don't really tell you a whole lot of what's going on initially.
I mean, okay, I thought, like, I didn't mind it. I didn't feel super strongly about it, but I think that's partially because I was kind of under the assumption that was done in order, like specifically in order to highlight the kind of character Peacemaker is, that he would just kind of not completely blindly, but more or less blindly agree to this and kind of just go with it and be like, yep, I'm doing this. And that, like, I guess it was kind of pushed for the other characters a little bit, but like for him, it was just kind of a, once again, he just follows orders. That's what he does. And he doesn't ask questions. He doesn't worry too much about, whether or not this is an important thing, or, how legitimate this team is.
I mentioned season 2 already. It's been confirmed that James Gunn will write and direct every episode of season 2. For season 1, he wrote the whole thing, as we know, but he only directed, I think, half of the episodes himself, probably due to like other scheduling conflicts. Like, I think he was working on Guardians 3 during part of the time this was being produced, so he kind of had to divide his time. And I think so much of this series just screams James Gunn. Like, it would be hard to try and continue this show as it is without his involvement.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see. I don't know. It's this weird thing where, like, people were very excited when they said he was going to direct The Suicide Squad, and it was like, it felt more like it felt more like if you want to do an ensemble movie, you get James Gunn. Whereas this seems a bit more like actually trying to elaborate something that he's working on, and I don't know. There are some parts, or some, I don't know, some James Gunn isms that I do enjoy, like, overall, but sometimes, I don't know, it might be better. Better. I might enjoy it more if there was somebody else involved. Like, I don't know if he's writing and directing all of them. It might get a little bit stale, maybe not stale, but a little bit like, I don't know. I guess same-ish is what I'm going for. Like, it might get a little bit, a little muddled in, like, the characters rather than the story. And he is setting up what seems to be an interesting story. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see the kind of the balance of that working out. But also, maybe not modifying, sprinkling in some different humor too a little bit, because, like, it's not all the same, but at some point you want to have, like, a different type. Like, you can have rude humor without it always seeming like the same jokes if you throw different things in, which is what I think, like, somebody like Taika Waititi, like, he's got some rude humor, but he's also got some absurdist humor. He's also got, like, he's got a little bit of everything, so it doesn't feel like one is dominating everything else.
Yeah, this is I kind of agree with you. I don't know if it is a good thing he's got complete creative control, because, when he's doing the Marvel stuff, yeah, he's writing and directing, but he also has the firm hand of Marvel Studios kind of making sure that his content is available to all ages. Whereas, as we talked about the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, they've seemingly just sort of given him free reign to do whatever he wants. And it makes it hard for me to recommend this show because, yeah, there's a lot of swearing, a lot of gory violence, a lot of sexual content that I personally don't think the show needed. I'm like, this show, I think could have been better without. I'm not trying to say it shouldn't have any of that stuff, but I think they could have dialed it back.
Yeah, although part of it might be the kind of the Game of Thrones effects. Like Game of Thrones had a lot more nudity and sexual content in the first 3 seasons. And then once people were hooked in by the story and the world, it became kind of lessened. And it's sad, but sometimes that it is what happens. They just throw a lot of things that people titillated by in order to get it to work later. But I also can't help thinking look, this is the whole problem with DC / Warner Brothers. They either give their directors too much control or not enough, and they need to find a middle ground. And hopefully, maybe this is where they will finally do it.
Yeah, because it just sort of feels like this is like James Gunn, just going wild. It's like releasing all of his, I don't know, ideas that he's not allowed to use on his Marvel projects onto the screen. And they're like, "Yep, do whatever you want because we need content for our service. Please, we'll take anything you can give us." And some of the James
is eventually that hits the Batman Forever.
Yeah, some of the James Gunn stuff I really appreciate, his kind of commentary on superheroes and his pop culture references and the deep cut kind of comments to being a superhero and what that is like. I enjoy those things. The fact that he finds these very obscure characters that are actually from the comics, and then he, for the most part, finds ways to adapt maybe only what the character looks like, and then comes up with a very interesting character. Like the version of Vigilante in this show, very comics accurate costume, but personality wise, very different from the versions from the comics. But Vigilante is such an obscure character. At least that version of Vigilante. There's a different Vigilante who looks like a cowboy, but this version of Vigilante, so obscure that fans are not going to be upset for having him portrayed this way, because the amount of people who care about that version of Vigilante, it's such a small audience. And I think this is his sweet spot, is taking obscure characters, bringing over some elements of their story from the comics, and then kind of making something new out of it.
It's like he takes characters that are just obscure, that are so obscure that the fans will be happier that they're anybody who cares about them will be happier that this character is finally getting exposure, regardless of what the character is like, kind of thing.
I thought Vigilante was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, it is something James Gunn is good at, is making, characters work together as well. It's just, again, like I said, sometimes it comes almost to the detriment of the story. It's something I found in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 when I started looking at I really enjoyed the movie when I saw it, but the more I looked at it, the more it was fundamentally the story is really not that amazing. It just works really well because there's good character dynamics woven into it. And I feel like there's a little bit maybe of that in here too.
This is just me being a conspiracy theorist, but there's also a fair bit of social commentary in Peacemaker, and I can't help but wonder if this is James Gunn trying to apologize and backpedal from all the things that he said on social media that originally got him in trouble.
It's trying to throw in what, I don't know, but you were talking about, it feels like he's trying to do all the things that he couldn't do in Marvel projects. And when Marvel tried to hit on social commentary in Snowy Owl, some of it was okay, but it was the part that was good was the part that was a lot more subtle. When it came to actually trying to put it in, it kind of sucked and was very clean and very you have to do better. So maybe there is part of that that's just being thrown in. Or even also, James Gunn proving that comics, comic books and superheroes can be a place to do that, because that didn't used to really be the case. It used to be like just, comics or comic book movies were pure escapism, but things like The Boys or, to some degree Snowy Owl are kind of pointing towards, yeah, no, we can actually also, give, real story without, hammering you over the head with it like, the X-Men did.
James Gunn loves music. I'm not a big music person, so the fact that there's all these segments of the show where there's these songs playing, it's kind of lost on me just because I can't appreciate music. But I guess people who do enjoy older music probably enjoy that, and I'm sure it all makes sense thematically. But not knowing those songs, I can't appreciate the musical scenes as much.
Fair. Although I've always liked that kind of thing. Like, I think it's one of the reasons why, beyond my massive fanboying over Edgar Wright, why I enjoy Baby Driver more than most people, because I've always wanted a movie exactly like that, where like most of it is songs, but like action sequences set to songs where they fit together. And I think like James Gunn isn't quite that level of it, matching what's happening direct. Like the action is literally set to the speed of the song, like on the beats, like gunshots on the beat of Tequila, but it's still something that adds into it and that I really enjoy. And I like 80s music, so I think I appreciate it.
Don't hate me, but I still haven't seen Baby Driver.
I don't. Look, I don't hate you, but maybe we should put it in the bat jar and then you'll have to.
Now, having only seen the first 2 episodes, are you interested in watching the rest of it?
Oh, definitely. I do want to see it. It's like, it's not, Lost or Death Note levels of I must see the next episode, but there's enough there to enjoy and to make me want to continue.
Right. Now, based on what you've seen, would you recommend this to other people?
Yes, but not everybody. Like, it's definitely, like you said, it's got a lot of James Gunnism. It's got a lot of, you need to be able to stomach some of the level of gore and crude things that are in it. But I think overall, it's still good enough that if somebody doesn't mind those in favor of, the good things that are in this show, I would recommend it.
I'm also just finding it interesting that, Marvel's approach to streaming is making content that is basically like their movies, which is like has a all ages or at least, PG-13 feel. But most of the stuff that DC's made for streaming is very like adults only. And I can't help but wonder if they assume that's a better approach, or that makes them more mature or more adult, or I just...
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think if you look at the direction that, like, even like outside of movies, the Marvel TV shows, and especially the like the things that Marvel and DC like TV shows, but even especially the animated movies and animated shows that DC has done versus Marvel, DC's always been trying to push the limit more in their not mainstream media. Like, everybody talks about Batman the Animated Series and how iconic it is, but it definitely wasn't a normal show, right? It took a lot of risks, and like the DC shows that started the concept of superheroes having TV shows also were not the same as their movies, right? Because those shows started around the time that the biggest DC movies were the Dark Knight trilogy, right? And that they're nothing alike.
So you're saying because DC's been in the game of having their characters adapted for other media longer, that this is the point they're at in terms of taking risks, is doing things that are more risque because they've already had so much done of just adapting their characters, which is kind of like what Marvel is still doing.
And I don't think it's quite that. I think it's more that because they've been doing it for longer, and they've been finding success in like, and I think it also has to do with like where the studio's at, right, or the companies right now. Marvel found something that works, and they're doing it. DC haven't quite found that. They've found things that work, and they sprinkle them in. They haven't found like the one thing or the one formula that they want to follow, and so they're still looking. And I think that's a good thing because it does give you things like the Harley Quinn show, like the Harley Quinn Poison Ivy show. It gives you things like the Peacemaker. It gives you things like Batman the Animated Series. It gives you things like Teen Titans. That was very different. I know most of those are animated, but to be fair, there weren't that many side projects. But also like The Flash, when it started, as well as Green Arrow, like they were.
What I'm hearing you say is that DC is more experimental in their stuff.
And I think it's a good thing because they do hit. I feel like DC is able to hit more demographics individually than Marvel manages to hit, even though they're aiming to hit all of them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, it's like Marvel's so mainstream now that
I'm not saying work financially. I'm saying work artistically.
Yes, that is true.
It's clearly what Marvel is doing is working financially. What DC is doing is not.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I enjoyed. I've seen the whole first season of Peacemaker. I did enjoy it, but like you, I'd be very hesitant to just say everyone go and watch this because it's definitely not meant for kids. And depending on how much you can tolerate people swearing every 5 seconds or whatever, like you might not enjoy this, but I certainly did. And I have a lot of respect for John Cena as a dramatic actor now. Like, yes, this series is mostly comedy, but there's dramatic moments. And in my opinion, he nails the scene. The moments where you have to feel for him, you really feel it. Like he's a good actor despite being a big muscly man.
No, I know. Again, not to rag on The Rock. He is really good at what he does, but he has like 2 notes that he can hit really well.
So I'll give Peacemaker season 1 3 out of 4 bad cookies.
I'm gonna hold off. I can hold off my rating.
Yeah, you can hold off
until I've watched it. But I give it a. It's not bad. I don't know. I give it a thumbs up for you. I don't know. I give it the beef pork ribs, a seal of approval, awaiting further details.
So Peacemaker is available to watch on HBO Max if you live in the United States. It's available to watch on Crave if you live in Canada. I have no idea where you watch it if you live in other parts of the world. I guess VPNs.
But don't. How are you listening to this podcast if you're not in Canada or America? I mean, why are you listening to this podcast if you're not in Canada? But, thank you if you are.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So as we talked about earlier, next week we're going to be talking about The Batman. I did find out this week Batman-related news. You know how there's that DC Super Pets movie coming out?
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about how Keanu Reeves was in the cast, but they didn't tell you who he was playing.
Mm-hmm.
They've announced who he's playing. He's Batman.
Oh, he's just Batman?
He's Batman. Kevin Hart is the Bat Dog.
All right. I like it.
And there's like a 1-minute trailer of, I'll send it to you after this. There's like this 1-minute trailer of like him and Ace interacting with each other. I find it hilarious.
Yeah.
There's also something about, Keanu Reeves played John Wick and his whole motivation was based around a dog. So you can't help but wonder, like, oh, like what's going to happen if anything happens to Batman's dog?
Oh, of course.
But anyway, yes, next week is The Batman. It's in theaters now. I would highly recommend it unless you find shows like Criminal Minds too intense for you. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
The